There's no sports league unlike it anywhere in the world, where cartoons and football come together. This is the United States Cartoon Football League, celebrating its 40th anniversary.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Flintstones, meet the Flintstones, they're the modern Stone Age family. From the town of Bedrock, they're a page right out of history. Let's ride with the family down the street, through the courtesy of friends to beat. When you're with the Flintstones, have a yabba-dabba-doo time, a dabba-doo time, we'll have a gay old time. Meet George Jetson. His boy Elroy. Daughter Judy. Jane, his wife.
Greetings, cartoon and football fans, and especially fans of classic Hanna-Barbera. This is Robbie Graham of the USCFL Network, filling in again this week for Bob Wilson while he's on vacation. He will return next Saturday for Round 7, as I just found out about it at the time of this recording. In our continuing series of episode runoffs, we are pitting two of Hanna-Barbera's most beloved and memorable franchises, the Flintstones and the Jetsons, in a 12-week contest. While we are still waiting for Masters of the Universe Revelations' remaining 5 episodes to be announced, we are doing this contest in the meantime. As with all of our episode runoffs, football scoring will be used. We are pitting episodes as they appear in our library of shows in alphabetical order. However, the information shown on screen will be in order of appearance. As we go into round 6, the Flintstones has extended their lead over the Jetsons by the score of 34-27. Now that the NFL is in full swing, round 6 will reflect this, as and after a brief pause, I will review Flintstone of Princetone from the Flintstones and Jetsons Night Out from the Jetsons, as we ask the musical question, are you ready for some football?
Well, it's Monday night and we're ready to strike. Our special forces are in full flight. We're coming by air and on the ground. Monday Night Football's taking over the town. We gotta get ready. We gotta get right. It's gonna be a battle in the NFL tonight. So get ready.
Welcome back. Here is the Flintstones entry for round 6, Flintstone of Princetone, Season 2, Episode 36, and a USCFL all-time favorite. Imagine if you were a big football star in high school, and while you're racking up points and touchdowns, the world passes you by, and when you move on, you'll be lucky if you're able to flip hamburgers at McDonald's. It's like what Fred deals with in this episode. The episode begins with Fred playing Scrabble with Arnold the newsboy. Arnold soundly defeats Fred with the word cataclysm, but Fred tries to get extra points with the word zarf, but fails to get the points, which was only 12 to Cataclysm's 79. After the game, Fred tells Wilma how he was beaten with words like esoteric and polo pony, in which Fred pronounces as palopany, a nod to the honeymooners, in which Norton pronounces it that way too. To prove zarf is a word, Fred gets the dictionary but finds his high school annual instead and starts glancing through it. At first, he talks about a girl he knew who went on to be a movie star. Then he finds a picture of himself when he was the star running back. Wilma reads that he would become a big-time accountant. Then she asks him what happened. Fred explains how he could have had it all and played football for many years and failed to graduate from high school as a result. Then he sees an ad in the paper about how night school could help further one's career, and Fred decides to apply. As Wilma is putting Fred's name on his books, Betty points out to her that Fred might go back to school to eye young girls in tight sweaters. Wilma admits that was how she bagged Fred and asked Betty to borrow a revealing outfit to wow Fred when he got home. Fred was oblivious to what Wilma was trying to do. When Fred asked Wilma if she put his name on his books, Wilma replies with what I think was the best line in the series. "No, I put an X on them so you could read it." Fred wasn't pleased by the remark. Then Wilma asks about the girls in sweaters, and Fred tells her right then and there that he's only interested in going back to school to get the degree he missed out on. Then at school, Fred is approached by a young man who's an upperclassman and makes Fred recite a ridiculous statement saying pretty much that he is lower than dirt. The upperclassman is a little runt. If I were Fred, I would have stomped on him. Makes me glad I didn't go to school in the Ivy League. Then at work, Fred is asleep at his post and attracts Mr. Slate's attention. Mr. Slate thinks that between the bloodshot eyes, babbling, and being asleep, he thinks that Fred has been drinking. Fred assures him that that's not the case and goes back to sleep on the job. Then Wilma runs into Mrs. Slate and told her that her husband, that he promoted his nephew over Fred because he's a college graduate and the nephew doesn't even work for his uncle. At school, the same thing happens to Fred as he's asleep in class. Fred wants to tell Mr. Slate that he's going back to school in hopes to get a job in the front office. Mr. Slate discovers that Fred is going to the same school he did and performs a secret handshake. Mr. Slate thinks that Fred is going to school to play football, but Fred points out that he's going to school to get the degree he missed out on in high school and not for football. Mr. Slate then calls the athletic director, in which he played football with many years ago, and convinces him about Fred's football playing days. The athletic director invites Fred to join the team, but refuses at first. Fred was carrying that upperclassman's books that he dropped. As the upperclassman paddles Fred asks the director if he would play with upperclassmen, and when the director said yes, Fred agrees. At this point, Fred is trying to juggle between work, school, and football, and gets everything all mixed up. Then at the game, Fred is just about out of gas as he plays football. He even calls plays that are accounting figures instead, but he helps the team to win the game 20-19 over their arch rivals by scoring 2 touchdowns. Mr. Slate is pleased with Fred's performance. He wants Fred to be the star quarterback for the team, for a pro team he wants to organize. Wilma tells Mr. Slate to get someone else as she carries Fred home and to bed. After a brief pause, I will review Jetsons Night Out from The Jetsons. And as a bonus feature, I will talk about an episode from the Pebbles and Bamm-Bamm Show called Gridiron Girl Trouble, in which Pebbles does a similar feat. This review will not count in the scoring.
See the sun on the horizon. I hear the engine of the F-16. Man, I can't contain the excitement when I see the colors of my team. Can you feel it? Can you feel it? Let's kick off! Let's kick off! It's time for some football. Come on, come on. Let's kick off. Let's kick off.
Welcome back. Now for the Jetsons entry for round 6, Jetsons Night Out, Season 1, Episode 5, and also a USCFL all-time favorite. The episode begins with the only episode of the series to appear at first in bad weather. Jane sends Elroy to school using a raincoat that looks like he's encased in plastic. Elroy asks Jane if she and George would go to the PTA meeting that night, in which Jane said they would. When it's George's turn to go to work, he takes a quick look at first at the newspaper headlines, in which one of them was about the coach's comment for an upcoming football game. As George heads to his car, the superintendent, Henry, asks if George will see the game, but he thinks he has tickets. George says that he'll be at home to see the game on TV, and asks Henry to do something about the weather at Jane's request. Henry complies and literally raises the roof on the building. George is running late and runs out of gas. He gets gas and ends up being 7 minutes late. George attempts to turn back the clock 8 minutes, and a security camera takes a picture of George doing this. This angers Mr. Spacely and deals with George, but his phone rings and Jane tells him about the PTA meeting. After Mr. Spacely dictates a letter to his secretary, she reminds him about the football game. Then he scolds George about what he had done earlier. Then Mr. Spacely's wife calls to remind him about a concert they were to attend. Then Mr. Spacely starts to do the old sick employee gag and tells her that he can't make it and drops the chair out from under George. When the call ends, Mr. Spacely makes it up to George by offering to go to the game with him. Then Mrs. Spacely calls back to try to do something for George and heads over to his place. George and Mr. Spacely heads there ahead of her for her to see it for herself that George is sick. George almost goosed it up when he uses football jargon to Mrs. Spacely. But it worked, but only for a moment, when Elroy comes home and George bribes him to say that he didn't see George. Then George and Mr. Spacely heads to the stadium to see the game. Once seated, they enjoy the game. Mr. Spacely asks George that what if Jane tries to call the office. George assures him that he has his answering machine set up. Jane does try to get in touch with him, and the deception did work. But little did George know that Jane did go to the PTA meeting. It ended early and was watching the game without him. Then Mrs. Spacely arrives at the Jetsons to ask about George. Jane tells her that he's not there. Mrs. Spacely thinks George had died. Jane calls the office again, and George's answering machine, which was a record player set up to play upon calling. The record skips and both women are upset. During halftime of the game, Mr. Spacely and George wins a fur coat while the wives are fuming over their deception. Mrs. Spacely sees them on TV, and Jane turns up the volume to hear what they had to say. They were both ready to pounce as the husbands were to come in. Mr. Spacely wanted to give the fur to his wife, for he bought the ticket. But the ticket George had won the coat. So George divides the coat in half to give to both wives. When the wives started to talk about extravagance, Mr. Spacely fires George after he made him a vice president as the episode ends. After a brief pause, I will talk about Gridiron Girl Trouble from the Pebbles and Bamm-Bamm Show. Welcome back. Now for the bonus feature to mark the end of the first half of this contest. Again, this review does not count in the scoring. This is the first episode of the Pebbles and Bamm-Bamm Show called Gridiron Girl Trouble. The show aired on CBS in 1971 for 16 episodes. This was the first exposure the Flintstones had on Saturday mornings. The show featured Pebbles and Bamm-Bamm as teenagers in high school. It starred the voices of Jay North as Bamm-Bamm, who was Dennis the Menace in the early 1960s, and Sally Struthers as Pebbles, who at the same time was starring in the then new sitcom called All in the Family. To get a further idea about this show, Pebbles and Bamm-Bamm had three friends. There's Wiggy, a puffy-haired dirty blonde who uses astronomy to determine certain situations. Then there's Penny, a chunky brunette who has wit to outsmart adversaries. And then there's Moonrock, the brains of the outfit, and at times invents contraptions to, like as with the others, to help solve problems. They also have their share of adversaries, like Cindy, for instance, a snooty, stuck-up snob who has money and often rubs it in the others' faces. And then there's Bad Luck Schleprock, who often causes problems and is more down in the mouth, worse than Grouchy Smurf or Eeyore of Winnie the Pooh fame. In this series, Dino and Hoppy, who were Pebbles and Bamm-Bamm's pets when they were infants, now have a small mammoth who Pebbles calls Wooly. For Bamm-Bamm's pet, he has a small triceratops named Snoots. One final thing. This was one of the many Scooby-Doo knockoffs Hanna-Barbera made in the 1970s. The way Pebbles looked in this series, she could be considered the Daphne Blake of the Stone Age and Bamm-Bamm the Fred Jones of the Stone Age. Now for the episode. It begins with a dog catcher capturing a dog, and if he gets one more dog, he'll get a promotion to head dog catcher. In the meantime, Bamm-Bamm's pet, Snoots, is fighting with him so Bamm-Bamm could get his books back for school. Once he meets up with Pebbles, they drive to school. Snoots follows them with the dog catcher stopped at a red light and then pursues Snoots. After the intro ends, Snoots goes into the school continuing to follow Bam Bam. To his dismay, he couldn't believe that Snoots did this. Pebbles stuffs Snoots into a locker with the dog catcher still in pursuit. The dog catcher asks Pebbles and Bam Bam if they have seen a dog, and they both say no in weird ways. Then Pebbles had an idea to disguise Snoots to look like a student with the help of Penny as she lent him her sweater. Then in geography class, Snoots answers a question correctly, and before he can answer a second question, the bell rings and the class ends. Snoots bumps into the dog catcher, giving himself away. Then they run into the locker room, and Snoots is disguised as a football player. Snoots gets the ball and outsmarts the entire team. The coach wanted to know who the new player is. Snoots runs into the dog catcher again, with everyone else running after him. Pebbles leads Snoots into the science lab, and she emerges in the football uniform. The coach thinks that she's the one who made that play, and now the coach wants her to play for the team. Not knowing anything about football, Pebbles tries to bone up on the fundamentals of the game. Then Fred comes to talk to her, and he sits on her book. She asks him if he knows anything about football, and with Barney's help, Fred tries to demonstrate his skills, only to instead destroy 2 walls. At a burger joint similar to the malt shop in the Scooby-Doo series, Pebbles and Bam Bam agrees to tell the coach about Snoots for fear she would be expelled. Cindy puts Pebbles down and vows to show her off. Then Moonrock comes up with a strength potion for Pebbles to drink, and after she drinks it, she becomes stronger than Wonder Woman. On the way to the football rally, the car the gang was riding in suffers a flat tire. Pebbles' newfound strength made it easy to fix the flat. After she does this, Pebbles points out that Pebbles is his girlfriend, but doesn't want a female Hercules for a girlfriend. Then at the game, and after showing off, the strength potion wears off, and Pebbles sees the size of the team to her disbelief. Wilma points out that there's a girl on the team to Fred's disbelief, and wonders what kind of father would let his daughter play football. You, Fred, that's who. When the game begins, Bam Bam tries his best to avoid Pebbles from getting hurt, and when she recovers a fumble, she bumps into an opposing player. She begins to spin like a top, knocking down the other players, and scores a touchdown. Then Moonrock gives Pebbles a remote-control football that will help her from getting hurt. With a whistle, a bird pops out of the football to help her out. After the opposing team ties the score, the coach calls a play in which Pebbles gets the football. The ball helps Pebbles scores another touchdown. Pebbles doesn't think it's fair and tries to tell the coach, and he doesn't want to hear it. Then Bad Luck Schleprock appears at the game. Penny puts him in the nosebleed section. When he grabs a peanut, another peanut falls down, and it sets off a chain reaction of mishaps. Moonrock swallows the whistle that controlled the football as a result, and Pebbles goes into the air and out of the stadium, still holding on to the ball. Then Fred realizes that the girl playing is Pebbles. Pebbles continues to fly around town with that dog catcher still trying to meet his quota, and fails. She tries to land by grabbing onto a stake that kept an awning in place. Then she comes up with an idea and snags a watermelon for the bird to eat, and she steers it back to the stadium. She lands on the coach and tells him the whole story. The episode ends with the coach being understanding about the whole thing and opts for her to become a cheerleader instead of a player. Bam Bam tells Pebbles that Snoots escaped again, and he's once again disguised once more as a cheerleader. After a brief pause, I'll return for the scores and wrap up.
Ha, 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 ha. Yeah, 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 yeah. Pressure's on, make or break. No matter how high are the stakes, no fear, build strong, dynamite, number one. Now this is the time to attack and stand tall, together for one and one for all. The fight of your life is before your eyes. There's no room for second. This is do or die. You gotta want it, you gotta need it. When it's time to lay it on the line, you gotta feel it, you gotta need it. When you dig down deep, so deep, oh, you gotta want.
Welcome back. Now for the scores for this round. For Flintstone of Princeton from the Flintstones, Fred's intentions were good as far as furthering his education was concerned. But winding up playing football again to his boss's delight was the only drawback, and this episode does get a touchdown worth 7 points. For Jetsons Night Out from the Jetsons, it was one thing for George and Mr. Spacely to sneak behind their wives' backs to see a football game, winning a fur coat and dividing it up for them, only for Mr. Spacely to fire George after he saved their necks, is another. I give this episode a touchdown worth 6 points without the extra point attempt. This makes the score the Flintstones 44, the Jetsons 33. Bob Wilson will return next week for round 7 of this contest and to start the second half. As always, we invite you to share your opinions about this or any of our episode runoffs and provide us with your own scores. Until next time, this is Robbie Graham of the USCFL Network wishing you peace. Take care and stay safe.